Today, we're talking must-have gear for the minimalist wedding photographer. My name is Mark Bergerine, and alongside my wife Brenda, we're professional wedding photographers. We shoot a variety of types of weddings. We'll shoot everything from the elopement, where we're hiking and going into a distant location, to like a more traditional wedding you might see. We often work here in Colorado or in California, is at, say, a ski resort or some kind of mountain venue that's more traditional, has a ceremony, reception. You can usually drive there. So we're going to talk through the equipment that we use, what type of equipment we use for what type of event, and hopefully you can get some insight on how we do things and what our process is. In terms of being minimalists, Brenda and I try to focus on having the minimum amount of equipment that allows us to get our job done and create interesting, creative images without having the gear slow us down, be too heavy, or be too cumbersome that it prevents us from doing our job in the best way possible. Our priority is to be fast, efficient, and not slow our clients down, and not have so much equipment that it gets in the way of the experience. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk through Brenda's camera bag, my camera bag, and a few accessories that we take with us in situations where we've got more capacity and we can drive right to the location. So with that in mind, let's break it down. So these are the two camera bags we use. This is Brenda's bag, this is my bag. First up, we'll be talking about Brenda's bag, and then we'll talk about mine. Brenda has the Shimoda Explorer X30, and we'll break down what's inside, why we use it, and what our process is. First up, a little bit about this bag. This bag is awesome. We've been using it for a little while. It's got a great exterior. It's like pretty durable and relatively waterproof. And it has a lot of organization, but it keeps things simple, so it's not like you're losing things and it has too many pockets. So on the back panel here, this is where we keep things like snacks, water, jackets, that sort of stuff. There's a headlamp in here, some business cards, a couple organization pockets, and that's mainly non-camera gear on that outside pocket. In the top access compartment here, we've got some accessories and access to anything that goes on top there. On the side, there's a pocket here that works great for a tripod or a light stand, which I'll get into later. And then all of the camera gear is accessed through this back panel right here. So I'm gonna pop out this camera cube and this accessory pouch and show you everything that we've got going and why we use it. So this camera cube is really handy, it's customizable, and I really like bags with camera cubes so that when we're traveling, we can grab this cube, zip it up, it's got everything sealed inside, and this is all of your essential gear in one small cube. So if you want to repack your bag, rearrange things, it just keeps things versatile and modular. In addition to this cube, inside the bag, we've also got this accessory pouch, and this accessory pouch just happens to be our Mavic Pro Drone. So everything fits inside this, and I'll get into that in just a minute. So inside this camera cube, you'll notice there's two gaps here. One is for the camera that I'm shooting on right now and the lens that I'm shooting on right now. So we each carry two cameras. We shoot with the A7 Mark III, and we shoot with, Brenda has a variety of prime lenses. So I'm gonna pull everything out and we'll talk through why we use it and why I think it's the ideal kit for the minimalist wedding photographer. So inside this camera cube, the camera we're shooting on and the lens we're shooting on would both be in there. That's the Sony a7 III and the 55mm f1.8. So Brenda has a variety of prime lenses. She prefers to shoot with prime lenses because of their low light capability and because of the sharpness that they have. Keep in mind that we often share and swap lenses, so these aren't necessarily specifically her lenses, but at the start of the day, these are the lenses in her bag. So she has the 35mm f1.8, the Tokina 20mm f2, and the 85mm 1.8, in addition to that 55mm 1.8. So it's kind of a a wide range from 20 to 85 millimeters in prime lenses, all with that really low light bokeh performance. When it comes to the cameras that we shoot on, I think the Sony a7 III is the ideal camera for a wedding photographer. It shoots great photos, it has awesome autofocus and low light performance, and it's a pretty compact camera. And the fact that it's a mirrorless camera is really helpful. It shoots both through the EVF and the back screen. It allows you to visualize your exposure before you take the picture. And it's just it's been around for I think 2 years now, and it's proven itself to be a really effective camera. We used to shoot with the Sony a7R III, but we found that the high resolution, I think it's 42 megapixels, just the file size was a little bit too large, and it was not quite as good in low light. When you get up to, say ISO 6400, the Sony a7 III, the file still looks great, but the a7R III, I found there was a little bit more grain, and it was just creating unnecessarily large files. So now that we've got our Sony a7 III, let me talk through the lenses that Brenda carries. The 35mm f1.8 is probably her most used lens. It's great for, kind of the documentary style that we prefer. At f1.8, it's awesome in low light, and it creates a little bit of depth of field where it blurs the background, creates that bokeh that allows you to really isolate your subject and draw the eye with that sharp. Beyond the 35mm that often lives on our camera, I think the second most used lens is the one I'm shooting on right now, the 55mm f1.8. 55mm is a nice medium focal length. I think it's great for portraits, it's great for details, it's great for a variety of subjects, kind of when you're shooting in that mid-range where you want a little bit of compression, but not so tight and so restrictive like the 85mm. The 85 is often a little bit hard to shoot if you're in an indoor location. It's just a little bit too long of a lens, but the 50mm focal length is more flexible, but it allows you to narrow in a little bit and clear up the clutter in the background of your images. Probably the next most used lens is the 85mm f1.8. This is an awesome lens for shooting portraits. It's great for shooting in evening time or when there's less light. It creates a little bit of compression, but it's not, so much that you have to stand really far back from your subject. It creates a really nice proportioned portrait. So if you're shooting, closer in, tighter on the subject, this is a really nice lens for those traditional images. And the last lens that Brenda carries is the 20mm f2. This lens is mainly used for night portraits or astro portraits where you've got the stars and a big night sky, big wide scene where the couple is smaller. And that f2 aperture is just a little bit faster than the other wide lens we carry with us, which I'll get into later. But we also got the autofocus version because this lens is sometimes she'll use it indoors when she's just really close to the subject but still wants to capture a wider scene. If you're going to be shooting night portraits, having a wide prime lens is essential. But if you don't plan on using it for anything besides astrophotography, you could probably go with a manual focus and save a little bit of money. So let's talk through some of the other accessories that are in that camera cube. First up, this is the Godox X Pro S flash trigger, and it's what we use to trigger all of our lighting. So I will get into that more in depth later in the video, but when it gets darker, this lives on top of our camera and allows us to fire all of our flashes that we carry with us. Next up, a couple other things. We always keep a spare battery in each of our camera cubes. This doesn't really get used, but it's just a backup just in case to have in the bag, just so you know it's there in case you need it. Backup batteries for the flash trigger. This is a gel, which I will get into later, but it goes on your flash to change the color of the light you're using. This is the filter kit that we use. This is the Mindshift Filter Nest Mini, and it holds mainly polarizing filters. So we have one for each lens that we have so that we can, we're often shooting with two cameras And having a polarizer on each allows you to have a consistent look and really cuts the glare. People often think that polarizing filter is mainly for if you're shooting on water, or if you're shooting, you want to darken the sky, create that really saturated blue look. But we find that these are also really effective regardless of what subject you're shooting. There's always glare coming off of everything in nature, whether it's the trees, the grass, really anything has some reflective value, and having a polarizer can really cut down on that reflectance and also give you a little bit more saturated colors. We're often shooting in the middle of the day when things are washed out. We try to avoid it, but that's just the part of the job. And where we live in Colorado, we often get a lot of really bright sunlight, so having a polarizer really cuts down on that glare and can help bring out some detail in your images. Additionally, in this filter bag, we also have some variable ND filters with a step-up ring in this case, and that allows us, those are mainly used for shooting video, but we just keep them in the bag in case we want to shoot like a long exposure of, say, some moving water when you've got brighter times of day. The last couple accessories we have here, lens cloths. These are always handy to have in your bag. Just wipe down the lens when it gets dirty. And then body cap and lens cap. It's always good to have a spare. Another thing that I didn't mention was camera straps. We really like the Peak Design camera straps because they can easily come on and off your camera. Most of the time we don't use them unless we're shooting near a cliff edge or somewhere where you wouldn't want to drop your camera. Most of the time we use the spider holster system, which isn't mounted on here, but I will show you that when I go through my bag. So now that we've unpacked her camera cube, I'm gonna pack that back up, put it away, and show you what else she carries in her bag. The other main thing that Brenda carries in her bag is the Mavic Pro Drone. We don't use this very much, but it's nice if we are able to fly and we want to get a unique perspective. This allows us to do that. So I'll just quickly break down how we have everything packed up in this accessory case. I like it because it's all together, nice and compact. In the top here, we have, again, polarizer and ND filters. Some spare props here in the top. And then in this main compartment, we have the drone itself, controller with a stick cover so that those things don't get bent when they're packed in here, 2 extra batteries. And then the other thing that I like on here is the one-piece gimbal holder cover. So I got this little accessory and it just eliminates having 2 parts to that gimbal holder and cover, allowing it to be a little bit simpler and more streamlined. When I'm going through our equipment, our goal is to keep everything as clean and simple as possible so that we're not dealing with missing parts or losing pieces, and just want everything to be super simple, very straightforward, and organized. Next up, I'm gonna run through my camera bag and what I carry in there. My camera bag is the Shimoda Explorer 30. It's 1 generation behind Brenda's bag, and it's just it's very similar. It's got a lot of the same features, same pockets here, and the same back panel opening. As with Brenda's bag, we like these bags because they carry really well. They perform like a traditional hiking backpack in terms of comfort, but they have quick access on this zipper to all your camera equipment and just enough organization to keep things sorted without having too many pockets to where things get lost. So I'm gonna break down my camera gear in the main compartment and pull out my cube, show you what's in there, and then I'll break down a few accessories that are in the top pouch here. So first, let's run through what's in this main camera cube, and then we'll talk through a couple items here that were also in the main compartment. All right, so this is pretty much everything that's in my camera cube. So first off, cameras, same as Brenda. I'm using the A7 Mark III. Awesome all-around camera. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but all of our cameras are labeled with the camera number and our contact information. And then the corresponding SD cards are also labeled. So we've got indications on if there's an error in files or an error with the camera, we can mark down, okay, camera 3, or just remember that camera 3 is having an error and go back and figure out what's going on. Not that these cameras have a lot of errors, but it's just a practice we developed years ago that we've kept going. So in my bag, just like Brenda, I've got 2 camera bodies, and occasionally I'll shoot 2 cameras, but most of the time I'll just shoot with 1 body and keep the second as a backup. The backup stays in the bag unless the main time that I shoot 2 cameras is during the ceremony, and that allows me to just shoot 2 different lenses without having to swap, and it allows me to be a little bit quieter and more discreet. In terms of lenses, I shoot with 2 main lenses. The 16-35 f2.8 is my workhorse. I use this lens for a ton of different stuff, so it lives on my camera most of the time. It's great for shooting super wide, kind of scene setting images, and then you can zoom it in to 35mm, and similar to what Brenda's getting, it allows you to shoot in kind of a documentary style. The other lens that I have in my bag is the 70-200 f4. Most of the time, this lens is used for ceremonies or for portraits where we're getting farther away and really want to compress in on the background. So we used to shoot with Canon, and when we shot with Canon, we had the 2.8 version. But most of the time in low light, we're switching to an 85 and a 35. So having those prime lenses accessible allows us to, use the f4 version of this lens, because it's just a little bit lighter and more compact. So when we're hiking in somewhere, it saves on weight. If you're interested in the comparison of the f2.8 to the f4 version, I'll link that here, or a couple other videos you might be interested in. I did a video on how to shoot with a 70-200mm lens, and I'll put that video here. And then I also did a review of this 70-200mm f4 if you want to get more detailed on the specs and why I like this lens. I'll link that here. In addition to lenses, those are the 2 main lenses. Sometimes I'll grab one more of Brenda's lenses, usually the 55mm. But the majority of the time I just use these 2 lenses. I find that they cover the spectrum. I'm usually either wanting to create a really wide image or a really, close in compressed image with this lens. So that's why I just carry those 2 zoom lenses. In addition to that, I'll run through a few other accessories that I have here and talk about why I have them. So, as with Brenda, I've got polarizing filters and variable ND filters for each of my lenses. Cuts the glare, keeps things looking good. This little gadget is the Loom Cube. I found that this thing is great for lighting dark scenes. It's a little LED light, and it comes with a grid and also an orange gel, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Allows you to change the look of the light. These little magnetic things pop on and off really easy. But I like this because we can mount it on a light stand, and it's just really lightweight, compact external light source if we need to add for astrophotography or some other kind of creative idea. Just having a little light source is handy. As with Brenda, I have a trigger for our flashes. I'll talk through the flash system that we use a little bit more in depth when I get into the lighting equipment. I also have a battery, body cap and lens cap, some lens cloths, spare batteries for the flash trigger, SD card wallet with some extra SD cards. I find that we shoot with 128 gigabyte SD cards, and those almost, I think there's been one occasion where we've filled them up. But since there's 2 cards, dual card slots on the Sony a7 III, you have instant redundancy. So we try to shoot with 2 cards and not swap them out at all during the day. But in case we had an issue, we've got some extras so that we're covered in case something fails. And then at the end of the day, we'll take 1 card out of each camera body, put them in here, and that way we know we've got, 2 copies in 2 different places. So I'll keep this on me until I import all the images. And with the cameras back in the camera bags, we keep those in separate places. So we've got 2 copies until we get them copied to the computer, in which case we've got 3 copies. The last thing I want to mention, these 2 little bags. I have a red one and a green one. So at the end of the day, we take all the batteries out of all the cameras, flash triggers, flashes, and then I'll put the SD cards with this as well. And that's everything that needs to be recharged and imported in terms of photos. So everything that needs to be worked on or brought inside comes in this bag, and the rest of the stuff can either stay in the car or wherever it ends up. The green bag is so that when we charge all the stuff and format the cards, everything can move over to here, and we know that this bag is good to go. So if we grab this bag, we know it's got all charged batteries, and helps keep us organized, especially when we're shooting back-to-back events or multiple days in a row. That way, keeps our system simple and really keeps us on track. One other thing that I didn't mention, this little gadget right here is the spider holster. We love these things because they allow you to put a little clip on your belt, which I'll show you a little bit later. And this camera just mounts and hangs from this little stud right on your side. And it's just a really clean way to keep the weight of a camera strap off your shoulders, and it allows us to be really inconspicuous and casual so that people aren't intimidated by a person with a big camera hanging around their neck. And we found that it just makes us feel more comfortable and have less neck pain at the end of the day. So now we've talked through everything that's in my camera cube. I'm gonna pack that up, talk through some accessories that are in the main compartment of my bag. First off, first aid kit. Love this thing. Always just makes me feel comfortable to know that I have some medical necessities in case I have an accident or somebody else does, that I can help take care of that. Back to camera related accessories. This is a graduated ND filter. It allows you to darken the top half of an image. So that if you've got a bright sky, usually at sunset, this is really effective to darken that sky if the clouds are lighting up or something, and keep your exposure more balanced. The Sonys have awesome dynamic range, but this thing just allows you to balance the exposure a little bit better, and it looks a little more natural, I think, than using that graduated filter in Lightroom and doing it in post. With our philosophy of kind of a minimalist approach, our goal is to create everything in camera as best we can so that we minimize the amount of work later, and so that we're more true to what things actually looked like. Inside this little accessory pouch, I just keep a bunch of small items that are helpful to have. And you know, if I'm trying to save some weight, sometimes I'll ditch this bag, but I find that having this allows me to just keep everything organized in one little kit. So in the top here, we've got some extra batteries for the remote trigger and headlamp, as well as another set of extra batteries for the flash trigger, just in case. And those batteries also cover the radios. And then in here, there's just a couple little flash mounting accessories. So in this compartment, I'll talk through the items that are in here. So radios, Brenda and I use these along with a little headset that allows us to be really discreet and communicate with each other without having to have other people listen in to what we're saying to each other on the radio. Sometimes that's good or bad depending on how we're communicating with each other. But most of the time, it makes things smoother and it makes us more effective because we don't have to be running back and forth to try to connect with each other. We just hop on the radio and can easily coordinate events that are more time sensitive. Next up in this bag, I have my remote trigger. And mostly I just use this in case I'm mounting a camera, say on a light stand or somewhere where it will be inaccessible usually it's during a ceremony, and it allows me to get another camera angle, and I can just quickly trigger that from wherever I am by radio nearby. This also works for star images. If you don't want to, use the timer on your camera, you can trigger it with this trigger. Headlamp is pretty key if you're going to be shooting at night. It's also just really helpful to have so that you're, if you're out somewhere at night and you're hiking back on a dark trail, you can make sure you stay safe. Another couple things here left in the bag. The Peak Design capture clip. This thing is really handy. It mounts right on your shoulder strap of your camera bag. Allows you to quickly and attach and disconnect your camera so you can have it mounted and accessible while you're hiking. I find that it's better than a camera strap, especially if you're scrambling or going somewhere where you want to have your camera more securely mounted than dangling around on a camera strap. So that's the Peak Design capture clip. Super handy little gadget. A couple other things here. Business cards, essential. Another flash gel as a spare. And I'll get into that when I talk about our flash equipment. A little wrench for mounting plates. And lastly, I found this essential to have in my bag is an extra eyepiece or eye cup for the back of the camera where you're looking through the viewfinder. It just, these things get knocked off occasionally, and trying to shoot without one, you'll really realize how important it is. It just blocks out some of that light when you're looking through the viewfinder. I think that covers the accessories that I keep in the main compartment of my bag. So now I'm going to talk through a couple things here in the top compartment. Set of earplugs I always keep in this top pouch here. Often we're at places where there's loud music, so having an earplug to keep your ears when you walk in front of the speaker from blowing out your eardrums. More spare batteries. Obviously, it's nice to have spare batteries, so I tend to keep them everywhere so that I make sure that I've got them accessible and I never get slowed down by having something go dead. Sunglasses case. And lastly, this little air blower. As you know, with mirrorless cameras, the sensor is exposed when you change lenses, and you won't notice how dirty it is until you go to shoot a high aperture photo when your lens has all the spots on it. So it's nice to be able to just quickly grab this, blow the dust off, clean your sensor, and keep things looking nice. So next up, we have a duffel bag of other equipment that often stays in the car or ends up in the reception. It's mostly our lighting equipment and a few things that supplement what's in our camera bags. If we're going somewhere more remote, we'll just grab a minimum amount of lighting equipment from that bag, usually one, maybe two flashes, and a couple other pieces, which I'll get into in a minute. But this bag is typically less essential equipment, so we don't carry it on our back, but we carry it in the car or leave it somewhere at the reception. I'm just gonna pull a few things out of here and talk through them. As you can see, everything's labeled, so in case somebody comes across this, they know whose it is. Tripod for shooting astrophotography, that's essential. Gaff tape. We have a reflector in here. Almost never use this, but it's nice to have if you do need it. So that's kind of a just in case. And then a bunch of lighting equipment. This is pretty much everything that lives in this extra bag. As I describe it, I'm just gonna set it out of the way. So, tripod, I mentioned that. Gaff tape, this is handy if you just need to tape two things together, or it's kind of like duct tape, but it doesn't leave residue. It's just super handy to have around for various photography related things. Umbrella, essential in Colorado if you want to keep your clients dry when it rains. It's always raining in the summertime here, and it usually only lasts a few minutes. So having an umbrella that you can quickly pop out, puts people at ease, nice to have. This is a Gorillapod. Mainly we use this for either mounting a flash in some space where we can't use a light stand, or we'll use it as mounting a remote camera up somewhere. It's just handy because the legs can quickly bend around things and help you to mount things. We usually each carry a compact light stand on the side pocket of our backpack. If we're traveling light, just one of them. And this is used to in kind of our lighting setup with one of the 8200 flashes that we use. Super lightweight, compact. These things are nice because they'll fit in carry-on airline bags, and we've found that even though they're only about 7 feet tall, they're enough to get the job done. And so if we're just shooting somewhere remote, we take one of them, and if we want to go super light, we don't take it at all, and one of us will just be a human light stand and hold the light. Reflector, mentioned that. We also have a couple other mounting options. This is a suction cup if you want to mount a flash to a window or some other surface that can be used with a suction cup. And then this is like a little vice grip mount for usually just a flash, so that you can mount it somewhere without using a light stand. So if we're traveling with all our equipment, we'll use 4 of these 8200 flashes. Majority of the day we just use 1, and that's for lighting portraits. And then occasionally, if we've got a ceremony that has a dark foreground and a bright background, we'll use 2 lights to light the ceremony, and usually we'll just do a few flashes during the ceremony so we're not constantly bombarding them with light, but it helps to brighten up the ceremony, and it matches the exposure with the backdrop and creates that look that people often go for, where they want to be able to see the view and their faces illuminated in the same way. And then the reason we have 4 of them is because we'll often light a dance floor at a traditional reception with 4 lights. So we'll have 1 on each corner and all pointed towards the middle. Sometimes we use a grid, sometimes we don't. That just helps narrow the focus of the flash, and it helps give it that kind of spotlight effect. So in addition to the 4 8200, these are the Godox 8200 flashes we also each have a traditional on-camera flash. And we use these in case we want to bounce light. If we're inside of a tent or someplace where you've got a nice place to bounce the light off of, usually pointing it up and to the right will give you a nice light source coming into your subject. These also function as a backup to the little triggers that we use, because these communicate with the 8200s. The last thing we use these for is for shooting astro portraits. These are nice because they're a little bit less power than the 8200. So on their lowest setting, that's typically what we use. We get a nice light that's just enough to illuminate a subject and then allow for like a 20-second exposure to shoot the stars. If you want to know more about our tips for lighting for wedding photographers, we'll put a link to a video here. And then one other thing to note about these is we've got everything gaff taped on any light source that could come off of this. Because these have little red lights on them, they can create a color cast in your long exposure images. So it's nice to just cover all that up. Last thing I want to talk through is these 2 little pouches that Brenda and I have. We each carry them. They have the same things in them. First off, a belt for mounting the little spider clip that we use that hangs the camera off our belt, keeps things inconspicuous, keeps the weight off our neck. Next up, the earpiece that goes with the radio, keeps things discreet. And then lastly, there's 3 extra batteries in here. Rarely do we need more than 2, but it's nice to have 3. And then there's also a little business card wallet in there. So this pouch, by the time we take everything out, has some space in there. We use these things to store paperwork, phones, anything that can just keep stuff from falling out of your pockets. Is nice to have a little pouch that goes right on the belt on the back and keeps things sleek. Each of us having one of these keeps things organized, and it just makes things efficient so that we have all of our little personal items right in one place where we know we'll need them. So as you can see, that's a ton of equipment, and I think what's important is that we only use the minimum amount of equipment to get the job done. So if we're shooting something really simple, like say an engagement session, we're gonna take usually one camera backpack, maybe 3 lenses and 3 camera bodies. That way we have a backup and we each have a camera to use. So the equipment scales to the job. And we have equipment that allows us to do everything that we can envision and create that without having so much equipment that we feel encumbered by all of our stuff. That's been something that's really important to us, is being able to move quickly, efficiently, and not feel like our equipment is slowing down our couples or getting in the way of the experience that we're trying to create. So I encourage you to figure out what works for you, figure out a system, and make sure that you're using the minimum amount of gear so that you can get your job done, but not slow things down. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. It helps us to create more free content for you like this. And we really appreciate you being here. Have a great day.